I'd like to next introduce to you Dr. Daniel Fine. Dr. Fine is an associate of New Mexico Tech and Center for Energy Policy. Previously, he was a research assistant with Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and he was a participant at Harvard University Business School Project Energy Futures. He's a member of Atlantic Council Working Group on Central Asian and Russian Energy, which is oil and gas, and a contributing editor for Engineering and Mining Journal. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fine.
It's a privilege for me to speak at an energy policy conference located in an energy-producing community such as Lee County and southeast New Mexico. This is probably the first energy policy conference in the United States actively convening, having a meeting, trying to influence policy where people every day work and produce energy. 10 years ago, 1998, we were told that we had come to the end of the old economy. You recall that that was the explosion of the internet, the microchip, electronic future was in front of us, and we would no longer need copper, zinc, nickel, oil, or whatever. This was the new economy of 1998. That year, ARCO, which was established by Robert Anderson, looked at a consultant report, and the report used a model to forecast prices of crude oil. In 1998, the management of ARCO were told the price of oil would be $15 to $20 a barrel for 10 years, upon which the board and the management sold ARCO to British Petroleum. This is all happening only 10 years ago, which shows the imperfectibility of future projections and modeling. There's something in the financial community in New York to Zurich called the Black Swan. The Black Swan is the unprecedented event that cannot be captured in a model. It cannot be forecast. The Black Swan in the 19th century was unheard of. Everyone would bet there were no black swans in the world until one appeared in Australia. With that, I'm going to outline the current complexity and confusion over energy security. What is it? You hear it every day. Energy security from your broker, energy security from in school papers, CNN, Fox News, and so on, and especially from the Potomac, from Washington. Energy security has changed, it's been transformed. Prior to 2001, 9/11, energy security was the following. It was based on petroleum. It was based on the import of petroleum to the United States because the United States was no longer self-sufficient. And that was recognized in the 1950s and 60s. The vulnerability until 2001 was, where would we get petroleum if a foreign country or set of countries embargoed us, or if petroleum oil was cut off, disrupted at sea, or if a blockade took place in a naval engagement somewhere. And we looked out and found that 15 to 20 million barrels a day of oil go out from the Persian Gulf. So vulnerability was based on oil, and it was based on the set of vulnerabilities to import dependence, because not enough oil was produced to meet American consumption. And the strategy to meet vulnerability until 6 years ago, was the following. It was simple. If you're looking at petroleum, then we have a stockpile. So we have an insurance policy, a strategic petroleum reserve based in storage salt domes around the Gulf of Mexico. The stockpile came into existence in the 1970s after the OPEC embargo upon Western consumers, mainly the United States and the Netherlands. Second strategic response to vulnerability was diversity. State Department in Washington developed bilateral ties to make sure that we were not going to import all our oil from one source, one country. So we had 20 years virtually of a deliberate policy to diversify through American companies. And in that period, we went to Venezuela for part of our supply, beginning of Africa, sub-Sahara, and we developed closer relations with Canada. So we were diversified in terms of supply. The other mainstay of that period on security of supply was coal, and of course the ultimate resource itself, which we'll hear much about today, and those were the unconventional fuels in the Naval Petroleum Reserve in Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, in the form of oil shale and oil sands. These four responses were strategic to meet a cutoff of our imports. And then something happened, and that happened on 9/11. Two events. One, after 9/11, the perception was that the Mideast was now in doubt. Once again, those of you who recall the Persian Gulf War in 1990 remember the principle that the United States would not allow any regional power in the Middle East to dominate oil reserves, whether it was Iraq or Iran or anyone else. Now, flash forward to 2001, and we have an attack upon the homeland from a source, an adversary in the Middle East. 2001, as you recall, and what I'm going to essentially emphasize, was a new definition of security of supply. From this point on, the Department of Energy, the State Department, cobbled together a new definition. And it was that the United States should have an affordable, reliable source of fuel, but subject to environmental practices and standards. This became the objective, and the objective then called up some policy positions, how to achieve that. And that period from 2001 was a period of price and supply disruption. The price of oil in 2003, with the invasion and liberation of Iraq, began to escalate. Price changed, and supply and perception of supply and cutoff brought back the school of energy security, which had been essentially dormant in the 1980s. Why had energy supply security disappeared? Simple. 1985, the price of oil slipped to $6 to $9 a barrel, in that range. The Saudi Arabian output increased as they went after market share and only corrected in 86, 87. The 80s said goodbye to security of supply and reaffirmed what would be called the economics of petroleum, price governed and supply and demand. But after 2001, perceptions changed. What we have then, after 2001, is a period of buildup of price and the entry into oil marketing of enormous funds that began to perceive geostrategic risk and cut off and supply, and they had their own data, and this was telegraphed, so to speak, over the internet instantly, electronically. In the 1960s and 70s, who knew if a bridge in Zambia was blown up and copper couldn't get to the refinery in Europe? Yet that happened. But electronically, there was no way to telegraph. Few knew what was happening. And of course, if it was true, the price of copper went up. So we had a mass distribution of information. Then in 2005, a black swan appeared. No one and no model forecast the beginning of climate change and the impact climate change or warming would have on energy supply. 2005 is the benchmark for the appearance of a conflicted view. Now we have in climate change antagonists who say we must abandon oil. From 2005 to last evening, this is present in security terms. There is a part of this country and in Europe, but not in Asia, which insists that we abandon oil, petroleum. And in Washington, from the last 2 years, there have been progressive legislative enactments to make that happen. You all know about alternative energy and, of course, biofuels. This development we live with today, and it creates something of a mystery if you don't live in the United States on how we debate $4 a gallon. What we have in front of us in Washington is, again, a movement. It's social, it's political, and science tech backed by the United Nations, that we should abandon oil, decarbonize the world. On the other hand, we have no substitute for liquid petroleum. There is promise, there is research, laboratory development, studies, and so on. We're 2 years out, and there is no commercialization in the United States of any substitute fuel for petroleum. Shell Oil is putting a great deal of money in, but none of their investments can be commercialized. I'm speaking directly to the biofuels debate, which then takes on a new compounding difficulty because mandates were passed in Europe and here, New Mexico as well, to move our consumption and demand away from carbon to alternative fuels by certain dates. And that mandate policy did two things. It created a price signal throughout the world. As soon as the United States Congress gave $300 million in tax credits and other forms to the ethanol industry, that was it. Farmers from Mississippi, Texas, everywhere, and indeed Indonesia, began to convert land into corn, or what could produce a fuel. And it was called, in this case, ethanol. If it's in Indonesia, it was palm oil. And this surge of investment, signaled by the basic price change which Congress in the United States created for it, has caused in the last 3 months a crisis of hunger and of food versus fuel. So we have now a third crisis, and this is the food security crisis, which is a derivative now of the other two. The food crisis is so severe that the land going from conversion to corn and then overseas to sorghum to other forms where you can get a liquid that is non-petroleum, has caused food shortages and price escalation in the United States, food prices. It has caused Oxfam and the environmental movements to say no more. We want no more land conversion to ethanol worldwide or any other biofuel which threatens food for the world, for the hungry. So we now run up to a conflict. Climate security tells energy security that we want to rid the world of petroleum, and the 18-month substitute was supposed to be ethanol or biofuel, which now has a wall of opposition against it. So much so that the smart money in Silicon Valley is moving away from biofuel to green technology, that is moving away from the supply side of a decarbonized world to the demand side. That money is going into efficiency, light composite materials, and so on. I just looked at an MIT study last week, and if on that side, demand, meaning light materials, light vehicles, etc., if all of the electric cars go on the road by 2030, if we have 50% or more hybrid, electric, supercharged gasoline, if we put it all on the road, the conclusion in this model was that we will only get back to the year 2000 in petroleum consumption. That's all. The objective is trying to get 20% of gasoline off the atmosphere by 2017. But where is the substitute fuel? So we're in now looking at $4 a gallon. Where does that go if we do not have liquid petroleum enough in the United States, and we do not have the substitution approach working out? This is so much of a crisis that 28, sitting here, we're in May, will look like a picnic against 2012 and then 2017, unless something happens. The laboratories tell us there is nothing, we have not obtained scale. Scale is the most important element in the development of alternatives to petroleum. Scale has not been developed, meaning unit cost, economies of scale in economics. The models sit in laboratories. They are benchmark laboratory, one of a kind. How to get scale, meaning production, unit costs down so they can be commercial, is not known today. And what has happened is an extension of Washington's support for another 5, 10, or maybe 15 years to give a lifeline to the experimentation side. Now, energy security, after all of this, remains a vulnerability. We do not have energy security for petroleum. I am not going to speak about nuclear, because nuclear, the nuclear renaissance, etc., is not part of energy security. No one should argue that we need a nuclear reactor because of energy security, because we do not use oil for electricity in this country. Very little left. And if we do not use oil, there's no case for the argument about the import of oil. The only element that will develop nuclear energy is carbon, a decarbonized world, and global warming. That is the accelerator to nuclear energy. Now, I want to conclude with a little note. I was asked, what could force prices down? And price is essentially what creates the economy, the national economy, vulnerability to a liquid fuel called gasoline. And remember, we're going toward a mandated 20% reduction of gasoline with no substitute in sight by 2017. What could do it? Well, Senator Domenici, if you were looking at C-SPAN a week ago, was on the Senate floor. And he had 19 Republicans behind him. And they registered for debate the Energy Production Act of 2008. This was supply, supply, supply. Supply of what? Supply of a fuel. Because looking ahead, the financial markets were already discounting any substitute in the out years, in the next 10 years. Thus, oil goes up if you speculate. The bill was debated and it lost on a party line vote. That would have created 24 billion barrels of oil in the United States had it passed. It would have allowed access to companies to get leases, permits offshore, continental shelf, and Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah for shale and sand. If the Congress that afternoon and the vote turned the other way, and Senator Domenici had authored his second energy bill in just 3 years, the price of oil, or let's put it this way, translate, the signal that the United States Congress had passed legislation to open its backyard to more supply of petroleum would have registered in the financial trading markets. And my estimate, which is developed with trading companies, etc., would have been with $3 million barrels of new oil perceived in 6 years, the normal time to develop, explore, drill, etc., and most of this is known oil, would have broken the upward so-called bubble in price and would have shattered what has been a run-up, an accelerator in gasoline prices. And with that, we would be moving backward because U.S. domestic resources have answered the 50-year strategy of if we are subject to a deficient supply of reliable and affordable energy, in this case crude, then we utilize domestic resources to change the balance. I want to conclude with that because there is one item that you hear endlessly on CNBC, and CNBC never gets the other part of the story. Everyone seems to be out there buying oil. Your pension funds are buying it in the futures market. College endowments are buying it. Individuals buy it, and so forth. And then they will ask an individual, well, why are you buying oil? And he will, or she will say, China. The mystery of China is simple. China is consuming about 6 to 7% more oil per year as it develops automobiles and interstate highways. But China's internal price of gasoline is the lowest in the world. The Chinese government, which owns the oil companies in China, subsidizes gasoline. And this pulls more world supply to China. So if China were to end the subsidy of internal prices of gasoline and crude, that is also the end of high prices. So the other side of China's growth is how China is growing. It's growing in energy because central government China subsidizes the price. So you buy it because it's cheap. And the bill is due from the oil companies back to the government. A Chinese oil company could not exist in the United States. We would lose money. So my conclusion is we have a road ahead unlike anyone before with 3 contending crises at once, 3 security conflicts at once. And this is the question I close with. One part of America says we want no more oil. And when they argue that, they say we want no foreign dependence on oil or oil from foreign sources, but really we want no oil. The other part is we want no foreign dependence on imported oil, and at the same time we want no oil. And then there's a third element to that saying supply, more oil. And the stage of the argument is almost Hollywood material. And I'll end with this. For 3 years, some leading Eastern Democratic senators have been hammering away at what? At oil, saying in effect, we are warming the climate, we must abandon oil. The 3 senators from oil-consuming states, 3 weeks ago, when oil hit $3.75, $3.80 in New Jersey, sent a letter to the president saying, what we must do, Mr. President, we must insist that the Saudi Arabians produce more oil. And if they don't produce more oil, we won't sell them military jets. The same people who want to abandon oil as a quick solution get the Saudis to produce more oil. So the state of the debate becomes, to many, unbelievable or incredible as it goes forward. And the American public, probably looking back at energy security, begins to pay a price. And the price we'll see this afternoon in the 3 panels. Thank you very much.